Welcome back. I'm Brandon, the HBAR Bull, once again joined by Zepsi. We both do some contract work for the HBAR Foundation, but we don't do these weekly updates in any official capacity. We're just coming to you personally to give you the latest in the Hedera ecosystem. Welcome, Zep.
How's it going, Brandon?
It's going good. I didn't think we could beat last week, but this week has been really exciting as well. As always, none of this is financial advice. Use it for entertainment or educational purposes only. So, Zep, at the heart of any crypto ecosystem, any crypto platform is the wallets. And we have a few things that I want to talk about with the wallets today. One of the things that's really nice is our main three wallets, Wallawallet, Hashpack, and Blade. They're kind of all working in different verticals. You know, we have Blade, they're working with enterprises, they're working with LG Art Lab and Karate Combat. Well, of course, we have Hashpack, which is certainly helping out our degens and our DeFi ecosystem, you know, one of the easiest wallets to use. And then we have Wallawallet, who's really good for our investors, our HBAR investors. And one of the things they had was a feature, and they talked about this to me back in the summer before they even launched it. And it was a way to trigger your native staking rewards. I never actually used it because I never saw it, but that was because I was triggering them another way. And I finally figured out how to use it. And I said, this is something that people have to hear about. So I talked to Jeremy. Listen in. Jeremy, Wallawallet has a little-known feature to trigger Hedera native staking rewards that I think HBARbarians will really appreciate. Can you explain it?
Yeah, sure. So when you have pending rewards in your wallet, which happens every day, the epoch on Hedera is 24 hours. So when that 24-hour cycle is over and you have pending rewards in your wallet, we have a super simple collect rewards button that you click, swipe, and get paid. It's as easy as that. And that's so you can compound your rewards daily. And it's super cheap. 1/10 of a penny is all it costs. So if you click to compound your daily rewards every day for a full year, it's going to cost you a little less than 40 cents. So it's super cheap. And what we did was we calculated a small amount of what the holder might have in their wallet. And we made it just as cheap as we possibly could. So basically, you're always going to be compounding additional rewards every day. So that 1/10 of a penny is kind of at that low threshold where, you know, even if you have a small amount, you're not going to be spending more than you're going to be earning on your daily compounding rewards. So that's why part of why we made it super small, because we want people that have, you know, we want all HBAR holders, whether large or small, to be able to compound daily rewards and get those payouts.
Okay, so you actually made the fee small enough that the compounding, even if you have a small amount in your wallet, outweighs that fee.
That's right. Exactly. Yep. Always looking out for the user. Yep.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we're looking for. Jeremy, for a long time, I was taking one wallet and I was sending 1/100th of an HBAR to my other wallet to trigger the rewards. The ease of use of this feature is worth it just to start off. And of course, we want to support the Wallawallet as well. Jeremy, thank you so much for swinging by, and you keep coming out with these features, and we're going to get a lot more users for you.
Well, thanks for helping us share it, Brandon. We appreciate it.
So I'm sure Wallawallet's going to come out with additional features for HBAR holders, but I actually talked to another one of our wallet providers, Hashpack. I met Nick, one of their security experts down there at Karate Combat twice. And so I just wanted to ask him, I was looking at my total value locked on my Hashpack, and I was like, I want to figure out how to best secure these. And he gave me some really good tips. And I was like, this isn't something I should keep to myself. This is something that all HBARbarians should know about. So listen in to the recording we had this past week. Nick, can you tell us about your security background, what you do at Hashpack, and your general computer security chops?
Sure. So I'm an application security engineer for a software company. Been an application security engineer for 3 or 4 years now. Before that, I was a software engineer for about 10 years. I worked on a lot of different stuff. As far as security goes, I've got a couple certifications. One of the best ones is that I've got is the OSCP, which is essentially a pen testing cert. So I do a little bit of that for my job. Yeah, that's a pretty good certification to have.
I got you. So, you know, many users of the Hashpack wallet do so from laptops, desktops, and particularly they do this for Hedera DeFi. What are some methods to keep their funds as safe as possible?
Yeah, so there's a few ways with wallets like Hashpack and MetaMask and so on that people can get your information, like your private key or your seed phrase. The three that I would touch on, as I feel are like the most common, first is don't give your seed phrase away. You'll find that there are phishing campaigns going on, like in Discord. You'll get a direct message from somebody claiming to be, support or something like that. If you say you have a problem, for example, in the Hashpack Discord, if you click on a link they send you and it asks you to put your seed phrase in. That's one way that they can get you. There's no reason under any circumstance for you to give away your seed phrase. The second that we don't really see this much on Hedera yet, but there's some targeted malware like wallet stealer stuff that can drain your wallet. There's also the possibility of being infected with malware that does like key logging and then data exfiltration and stuff. You don't see anything as prevalent with stuff like MetaMask and other wallets with Hashpack and Hedera yet, but I feel like if Hedera continues to grow, we'll see more of that. The last one that I would touch on would be malicious smart contracts. So if you sign a contract that you allow to drain your balance in whatever way that they do that, that's a way that they can get you. And that's why we have a warning when you sign smart contracts to be like absolutely sure in Hashpack, to be absolutely sure that you trust the source of this smart contract. In addition to that, I would say like don't use public Wi-Fi and interact with your wallet in case you're on like a bad network or something. Use complex passwords that you don't use for other things. Only install software from trusted sources. Like don't install Hashpack from a random website. You want to get it from like the Chrome store or Play Store or the App Store, and you want to always keep your software up to date. If you do those things, I think most of the time you'll be fine.
All right, Nick, do you have any other general thoughts on security?
Yeah, so security is a constantly evolving landscape. You want to be vigilant about potential scams and new threats that may be emerging. You don't even need to be technical. Just keep an eye on like security news sources and see if you're affected by any vulnerability disclosures. And if you do that, you want to update your software. You should remain vigilant and look for stuff like if something's asking you to install a piece of software, like verify that it's legitimate. Because most of the time you have to click on something or interact with something to get hacked, right? So you don't want to install something. You don't want to click on a link you shouldn't. You don't want to give data when you shouldn't. You want to disable DMs from people on like Discord and Telegram that aren't on your friends list. The exception to the rule of like not interacting with something to get hacked is like for 0 days. And that goes back to just keeping your stuff updated and being vigilant.
And I know you have to link your wallet to these apps when you're using them. So before you do that, you really need to ask as many of the great resources we have in the space as possible. It's the old adage, measure twice, cut once. You have the Hashpack team and the Wallawallet team, the Stater team, but you might try to contact them and get a hold of a malicious actor. It might not be the actual team member. So double, triple check, talk to 6 people, talk to people on the phone before you link your wallet to any of these applications. Nick, thank you so much for swinging by and giving us some really great insights on how to keep your Hashpack wallet secure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And Hashpack actually had another really exciting announcement this past week. We got the answer to when Ledger. So on a tweet they put out, they said, Hedera and Ledger are working together to add support needed for HTS tokens and native staking functionality on Ledger. The work on Hedera's side is complete. In the second tweet in that thread, they said, Ledger estimates 6 weeks to review the changes for compatibility and security, and 7 to 8 weeks from now until it's live. Now, of course, we're really used to delays here, so we can guess this is going to be about 3 months out, but it was still really good to see that we do have a timeline for when Ledger is going to support native staking and HTS tokens. So, Zep, another exciting thing that happened this week, I had a fintech Twitter space on Tuesday, and we heard from somebody that I've been trying to get a hold of for a really long time, Carmelle Cadet. She's the CEO of Emtech, and they're working with all kinds of central banks, but she had some really good insights and gave us a backdoor view into what's going on with Hedera and CBDCs, and also gave a really good explanation on ISO 20022, which there's a lot of misunderstanding in the crypto space around that standard. Normally, I try to get the clips for these weekly updates down under 10 minutes. So I was thinking, I'm just going to grab, 6 minutes worth of highlights. Well, I cut down to everything that she said and it came down to about 16 minutes, but it turns out the entire thing was a highlight. So I wanted to include the whole thing. Listen in. Carmelle, you're providing solutions to central banks that are interested in exploring and launching CBDCs. Can you tell us about the level of interest from central banks and how you see the progression to CBDCs going in the years to come?
Sure. So this is a pleasure to finally make it to one of the HBAR Twitter spaces. I've been wanting to join and it's never been an accommodating time. So hello, HBARbarians and the network and the community. Love the support and wanted to say hi. But let me jump in to talk about CBDCs. This is CBDC journey for us started from my days at IBM. when the Project $10, which is Central Bank of Bahamas, really kicked off their journey in looking for specifically a blockchain solution to help them modernize their payment infrastructure. So that became very fascinating to me. If anyone follows me and knows me, I'm very passionate about modernizing modern payment infrastructure, if you will, introducing that to especially emerging markets and giving access to sound and trusted financial services to people regardless of where they're from, their income, and their history and where they live. So I'm originally from Haiti. The access to financial services is something that's very important, and I see that as transformational to people's lives. So central bank digital currency was, for me, not particularly what I started as the idea, but the very simple idea is how do we bring cash on distributed ledger, on blockchain, to really democratize the access of it, really bypassing the traditional barriers that you can think of people getting access to financial services. And since 2019, when I started Emtech, I saw the opportunity to go talk to central banks about this transformational technology that you call blockchain and distributed ledger, and introducing that to central banks and realizing the opportunity that they also could tap into, even if they came from an understanding of blockchain when it comes to context of Bitcoin. Since then, of course, we've seen the trajectory and the interest growing from central banks when it comes to central bank digital currency, but it wasn't always that straightforward. As you see the conversation happening now, before, the fear of the technology and the misconception around that it is something that is for illicit use and for money laundering and for only bad actors to use. And that education process has been part of the journey for us, and taking the time to educate central banks and share with them what opportunity really lies ahead if we really thought through the tokenization of cash, the use of distributed ledger technology to bypass and open up the trust layer that is needed for more access, and also bypassing a lot of the difficulties when you think about correspondent banking, when you think about the rules that makes it very difficult for people to access financial services. And as we did that, we realized that every protocol was built the same. And in my days at IBM, having firsthand understanding of Hyperledger Fabric, understanding the value that it brought, but also the limitation that it had. And as I was transitioning, some of my colleagues at IBM decided to join a company called Hedera that was just starting out at the time to build a new protocol. And we learned along the way. My colleague Azim back then, and the team, and Don Tebow as well, back in the day, kind of really bringing in a new protocol and a new way of thinking about distributed ledger technology that was built for enterprise. So we learned as the protocol was being built and took that on the road with us to really kind of differentiating what was a value proposition into this protocol for enterprises. So the governing council, that structure was very attractive to us, and understanding how that could bring a lot of value for a client segment like central banks. So along the way, we've had some major wins that really paving the way for CBDC adoption over time, which led us to talk about regulatory sandbox, regulatory aspect for the central banks to make it easier for CBDC to make it to the market. But since we're talking about fintech here, one thing that's very important, I think we have now lessons to look at, or at least examples to look at, on how important the fintech ecosystem is to the adoption of CBDC. If you're going to solve for financial inclusion, one elephant in the room, big elephant in the room, was, do you start with the banking system to introduce CBDC and to attract people who are outside of the banking system? So we took an approach of having a fintech friendly and thinking about the ecosystem at the very core of our design. And Hedera Hashgraph kind of made that very easy for us to build on a protocol that allowed us to abstract the difficulties around node management, having different organizations joining to manage nodes. And I saw how difficult that could be when you do that in an organization. And we were able to abstract a lot of that difficulty and just build on top of that protocol in a trusted way. So that's where we are. And now you have over 90%, I think just about every central bank, to be honest, is talking about central bank digital currency at this point, not all for the same reasons. You have some countries who are looking at it from a competitive perspective, but you have a lot more central banks now that are thinking about the future of payment infrastructure. I think it was last week where I chuckled a little bit when Bank of America kind of came out and said that this is just an evolution of payment infrastructure. And I think it's a good sign to look at it that way. Thank
Just
you.
to follow up with you real quick, I believe that Hedera is at the heart of your tech stack. And can you just explain how you're using Hedera and the level of comfort from your central bank customers on using a public DLT like Hedera?
Sure. So it wasn't always that straightforward, but we made a bet. We made a big bet back in 2020 when we decided to use Hedera. A lot of people told us, how are you going to sell this to a central bank to have a public DLT? But at the core of our decision was also the understanding that the private network had its limitations, right? And when you think about the need for governance and onboarding different players, and having a private network also brings you back into a closed system that only is open to the members of that network. How do you bring that decentralization with a private network? And it wasn't really possible. So believe it or not, today I don't spend a lot of time convincing central banks about public networks anymore. And what Hedera has helped us prove is that you can have a public network and still provide privacy. When you look at a public ledger, the information that you see on a public ledger is not individual information. It's not PII, but that transparency brings a lot of value into reconciliation, brings a lot of value into disincentivizing bad actors, and also creating a lot more value for the ecosystem to be able to use data and build on top of. That's something that's pretty unique. And yes, you're right. A lot of, many people would probably argue that that would never happen. But what we are seeing now, and even RFPs that we're getting now from central banks, are clearly stating that they are open to public ledgers. So it's a major milestone, and I'm glad we made the bet. And we took the time to educate and have the conversations with central banks. Too long ago, I think it was September of last year, we were at the CBDC conference in Frankfurt, Germany, where many central banks across the region that we work primarily with, which is in Africa and emerging markets. So you had the Bank of Ghana, you had Central Bank of Nigeria, you had Central Bank of Bahamas, and you name it, just about, and a lot of European central banks as well. And we presented our stack and also our design model, which is an API-led model that does not compete with the ecosystem, that instead really reflects on providing an infrastructure, a modern infrastructure that allows the ecosystem to build and innovate on top of. And one of the questions that we got during our presentation was, how come you guys are the only one who built it this way? And it was a moment for us because it was a major validation. And then just to have another central bank stand up in the room and say, guys, this is the way forward. This is the right way to build this. We're seeing this in our markets. APIs, fintechs are building with APIs. This is a new technology. This is a new way of exchanging data. And this is how we should go. So that's where we are now. Of course, for everyone in the community, I wish things move faster than they do. It is a longer cycle. It is a big decision for a central bank to decide to deploy a CBDC. That's why you don't see many of them doing that right away. But the work is being done behind the scenes, and we continue to build. We leverage not only HCS, but we also use HTS, Hedera Token Service, to natively mint the token on the Hedera ledger. And then we see a lot of value proposition around interoperability. We are working right now on the digital dollar project. You'll hear more about that in the coming months, on where we're testing use cases like stable coins that are backed by CBDC. We're now testing cross-border payment solutions on the Hedera network as well. So imagine 2 CBDCs deployed on Hedera, and then having the fintech ecosystem bring in their apps to provide that interface for the users to initiate transfers from one CBDC to another in a very seamless way, and have all that recorded on the ledger right away and visible and auditable, and having a liquidity mechanism that is unprecedented. So we're really excited about that.
From the Hedera token service standpoint, so when you're issuing tokens using HTS through Emtech's infrastructure, are those tokens ISO 20022 compliant as well? Or is it just the HTS aspects that are built into the infrastructure that make that messaging compliance through ISO 20022 kind of, run the gamut? Because this is the first time I've heard HTS through you guys. I might have missed it, but just curious.
So we spent a lot of time looking at ISO 20022. And the way to think about it is HCS is really a message bus, right? And ISO 20022 really establishes some standard of messaging types or messages that you really need to capture in a payment transaction to make it understandable from one system to another. And this is a standard that not every bank and not every financial institution has adopted yet. Many are still going through the process of adopting. And what we see in HCS is ability to actually comply to that. You can configure your messages and the message types that you capture via HCS to be compliant to ISO 20022. So I know this is a question that comes up a lot. And the reason that I don't think that Hedera particularly needs to kind of think through making HCS ISO 20022 compliant is because it is at the application layer that you really need to make sure what the message types that you're gathering are compliant to that standard. And that's our approach to it. I'll give you an example. When you think about payments, especially cross-border payments, something that's always been embedded in that process is the concept of clearing and settlement. What we learned what we've seen over the past, 10, 20 years when it comes to token transfers and tokenization is really the settlement part, right? No clearing per se. The clearing happens off chain, and the clearing sometimes happens in a very embedded way at the wallet level where, someone gives you their wallet number. You trust that it's their wallet, and you go in or either Coinbase or any other platform, you enter the wallet number and you send the money. That's pure settlement. There's no clearing component. What we're looking at actually now, if we want to comply and capture the clearing component of a payment, which we believe will continue to be needed, is embedding that HTS component to the HTS transfer, the token transfer itself, and having that message bus capture the right data and the right messages for it to be compliant from one financial institution to the other, or from the sender to the receiver. And depending on what you have on the other side, if it is a HTS to HTS transfer, it's a very seamless kind of messaging system, depending on what you put on your message bus and you attach to that settlement layer. And so for us, looking at HCS as a message bus and then making and capturing the data type and the messages type to combine with that transfer can be ISO 20022 compliant.
Why was Hedera the DLT network that you wanted to go with?
I'll jump in. And again, thank you for setting this up. This was a great conversation. And I think highlighting what Hedera brings to the table, it continues to be an education and introducing it to the public. But our selection of Hedera as a protocol came in a very thoughtful way. And I don't think Azim is here or Don Tiboy is on the call, or maybe Jordan is somewhere listening to this. But the conversations were really digging into how the governing council was able to provide that trusted mechanism for a client segment like ours. So me walking into a central bank, I wanted to feel comfortable explaining what protocol we would be selling them and what protocol we would be advocating for. We tested, like I said, we tested Hyperledger when I was at IBM. For a period of time, we tested Stellar as well. And then we went to Ethereum. And the conversations continued with the Hedera team. And we started with just a consensus service and see how that worked. But went full-blown Hedera with also using Hedera token service when we saw the beauty of abstracting the difficulty of onboarding different node managers. If you've ever built a blockchain ecosystem on your own, you know how difficult that can be. Being able to convince enterprises let alone in the financial services space. And I think we can look at examples in the market right now on how that did not work well, convincing different financial institutions of using some protocol's token or some other entity's token to facilitate payment was not something that was going to hold. So the abstraction of the node management and then having a clear strategy of having large enterprises that our client segment use for either their cloud deployment today, their security technology, their API technology, and that they trusted really made it easier for us to walk into the room and say, if you trust IBM to do your cloud, you can trust IBM to run a node for you. In the US government, if you trust Boeing to fly and to build planes, you can trust Boeing to actually manage a node and provide a public ledger mechanism.
That was I think that was definitely one of your best spaces so far, Brandon. I mean, the amount of gold dust we heard in that, this narrative, the ISO narrative, is one that I'm seeing more and more on Twitter. And it kind of ties into this utility bull run narrative that there are ledgers out there that facilitate things like payment on a global scale with these new standards, and will be there for the next generation of those payment systems. And, I've seen BitBoy cover with Hedera being one of these coins, the ISO coins. I've seen Crypto Mason do it. And if you type in ISO 20022, whatever it is, on YouTube, Hedera is one of the coins that is often mentioned. And I think this goes back to an article that a lot of people have cited where Hedera is listed on there as being a compliant coin and whatever that means. But we haven't had it sort of officially said by, a party building within the ecosystem. And so this week we got Carmelle Cadet, the CEO and founder of Emtech, who works officially with the Bank of Ghana, who is at the heart of these payment systems, at the heart of these payments languages. She's at the beating pulse of everything that's happening in that industry. She came out and said that, the HCS is there as a facilitator of that language. And so in whatever term that means that everyone says, ISO compliance, ISO 20022 compliant, whatever it is, Hedera is one of those. And that's now cemented in that space. And, we've got that clip forever to fall back on. But the other thing that we had within that space, beyond that incredible insight from Carmelle, was YPay or WePay. And as I understand, WePay are the biggest payment facilitator, like fintech, in the Caribbean region. And so Danny Eid actually came out after it and he put out this amazing sort of synopsis, like he always does, not only of that space, but also 7 other things that none of us have ever seen as well. And he managed to get that out in about 10 hours as always. But within that, we saw that I think a few months ago at YPay Jamaica, they held their sort of annual conference to celebrate their technology. And at that conference, you had Viv from the foundation, who's the head of technology, doing a presentation on YPay and on something called Ycoin. And this is essentially a stable coin built on the Hedera token service, pegged to the US dollar, that is facilitating cross-border transactions in the Caribbean. The Caribbean, I think, is composed of about 20 different countries or so. And for each of them has their own currency. So to send money from island to island, it has to go through a corresponding bank, who of course takes a fee, who has to convert it into the currency or whatever, but they all also accept the US dollar. And so by uniting all of these islands under the Ycoin, under YPay, built on the Hedera token service, they are now removing those inefficiencies in place from the corresponding banks and enabling a complete payment network for that region. So in the truest sense, I think they said 50,000 websites and payment sort of ATM kind of providers or payment card providers, whatever it is, are using this new YPay. And they've also got, they've got partnerships with MasterCard, YPay do. I don't know whether or not the Hedera token service token's in there yet, but I'm sure we'll learn more about that in the future, what the relationship is there. But I mean, yeah, what a fantastic announcement to hear in that spaces for the first time. To then have it backed up by Danny in his thread. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that soon. But, this is the true efficiencies of Hedera, again on scale, again doing what DLT is set out to be, but only a handful of networks can facilitate it. Obviously, Hedera is one of those. And I think actually, if I'm going to push this point any further, Carmelle actually said in that clip, she said, the reason why she went into the Bank of Ghana, the reason why she gets a table in these places talking about Hedera is because of the governing council. The nodes, they need to know that the nodes are being upheld by credible institutions like Boeing. Of course, you can build jets. Of course, they can run a node. And so that is the secret sauce that we have, is not just the efficiencies of the hash graph, but the credibility of the governing council. And it just seems to me that this is going to happen over and over again. We're at the very, very start of this push into the payments world, and just very excited for that. We had drop at Davos as well. So I mean, there's so much going on there, and yeah, what a fantastic spaces.
Yeah, we'll get into Drop at Davos here in a little bit. But, there's so many great teams. You're talking about Drop, we're talking about Emtech, we're talking about WePay. They're just great teams. It seems like Hedera just attracts these really bright teams. And another one of those teams we talked about last week, and that's the team behind the Upside Co-op. Now, they're also the team that's behind the Hashgraph name service, and they came up with a new structure, a legal structure for entities that are building in Web3 that could really revolutionize things. So I caught up with their team. Listen in. To start off, can you tell us about this white paper you were involved with that has gotten a lot of attention, and not just in crypto corners, but across the board?
Yeah, no, it's to be honest, I think we were a little surprised how much attention it did get, with the little push that we did, right? And it's been exciting. And this paper really marks a turning point, we think, for just the industry in general, where the industry has moved towards more and more complex use cases for blockchain, and with us Hashgraph and just cryptocurrency in general. And as we've moved more towards these complex use cases, a lot of the value has gone off chain, right? A lot of the value is built in the equity of these companies that actually produce everything that is going on chain. And we've moved away from shared ownership in a traditional sense, right? With like what that meant in Bitcoin. And, with our paper and the approach at using cooperatives, in this novel way, it allows us to actually make something that can still be decentralized and permissionless. It can be censorship resistant, but it's also going to allow shared ownership of the off-chain value that's being created in these businesses, right? It allows NFT projects now to be able to have that relationship with their customer, which is, the collector of these NFTs, to actually have that equity ownership as well, be truly a part of the business, to not get left behind when the project is going to have a bunch of brand licensing revenues, right? Things like that. So, that's why we think it really is incredibly important. But to that extent too, because we always get excited about enterprise use cases, right? That's also where this comes in pretty big, is that when you look at a traditional company, as we affectionately call them all the time, Web 2 companies, right? But when you look at them trying to get into this space, it's never quite as authentic as something that organically comes from our industry, right? And that is another barrier that we feel that the paper is going to break down, right?
Cough, Porsche. Yeah.
Cough, Porsche. Yeah.
So, I mean, the cooperative framework has been around for a long time. Why is that where you focused with this paper?
I think it's just because, we hold to certain ideals, and that is, shared ownership needs to be accessible, right, to everybody. And, that's the benefit of co-ops having been around for so long, that they're truly international entities, right? That you can have a co-op in California where the members of that co-op, grow coffee beans in South America, and they're the owners of it, right? And so you can have something that for, this world that we play in where it is truly global. A co-op is built for that. It's built for being open and being a little bit more meritocratic too. Cap table, right, which is the graph of ownership for a traditional business. the interesting thing about cooperatives, they have a very dynamic cap table, right? It's changing all the time because as people participate, they are constantly changing the ownership structure and how much they own based off how much they participate. So, holding to the ideals, that's why co-ops come in really well. And kind of the secret unlock too is that because co-ops afford the consumer or the participant a lot more general protections, the SEC has declined to ever recognize cooperative ownership as a security. That is incredibly important too, because if we look at digital assets as becoming something that is a security, it adds that friction layer that makes what we do kind of impossible. If every token was a security, we'd be in trouble as an industry. And so, that it allows now a general consumer to have a touch point, an ownership touch point with a business through the cooperative, where the cooperative can handle, that piece that does need to be highly regulated. And it should be, because it does protect the consumers the way it needs to, but, gives them that entry point so that they can participate in this ecosystem the same way they generally would. But it's not going to take us down a path where regulation stifles innovation.
Yeah, navigating this regulatory environment is going to be critical going forward. And you mentioned the amount of attention that this paper has gotten, and I think that might be because of some of the names that are associated with it. So, Nate, you have some heavy-hitting partners in writing this paper. Can you tell us how these connections were made and where you see those partnerships leading?
Totally. So our counsel, James Wigginton, who's one of our co-authors on the paper, he's at Oric, and he came to some renown originally for helping with something called Buy the Broncos, where they tried to buy the Broncos. So they didn't do it successfully. The Waltons bought the Broncos, if you don't know. But it was the first time that somebody really got out there and tried to use cooperative precedent to back a DAO and try to sort of aggregate all the legal nuts and bolts that you need to make a decentralized organization legal, and try to propel that towards an objective. We sort of got introduced to him because we were trying to solve some of the same problems, and then via our work with James, we also made contact with KPMG and established a partnership based off of their willingness to want to dive more into Web3 and the metaverse as well. So,
yeah, and if I may, the partnership with KPMG and writing this paper has been incredible. Things that we wouldn't have known, like David Antony, one of our other co-authors who's over at KPMG. He was the president of NSAC, which is a great acronym, but it is the National Society of Accountants for Cooperatives, right? The national body. We had the best of the best working on this to make it viable, because there's a lot of questions, in the paper that are not related to how does this just work, but there's so much tax and accounting implications. There's so many different things behind the scenes that we didn't really see going into it, which is why the partnerships have been so incredible. Our partnership really was just limited to getting this paper, while we still engage KPMG on our side for Upside Co-op and everything. That is where we see a lot of it going forward. But I think the big thing is that we see them as also being proponents of the model, and that they are also going to keep preaching the word, and hopefully we'll be able to get that to every corner, and get the industry to start recognizing that there's a good way to do this.
Sure. So what are some of the next steps for Upside Co-op?
So there's really a lot of next steps, right? So from sort of a philosophical perspective, obviously we made the switch to the Upside Co-op from our original branding, the Upside DAO. And what we really want to do is we sort of want to re-unleash co-ops on the world. We want Web3 and private companies to see how powerful empowering your community with ownership is. And we sort of made that branding switch because we and other people who are big in the DAO space realized that DAO isn't necessarily an apt term. We're not decentralizing anything, right? Like, this is the way humans already want to behave and provide value to their communities. Humans are decentralized and asynchronous. We're just using existing legal and financial precedent to better map the way humans already want to behave and contribute to their communities. From like a business perspective, we are helping Web 2 companies with ownership-based loyalty programs, some of the first opportunities for private companies to do this in existence. We're obviously doing the same thing for Web 3 companies, but additionally, we're helping them meet compliance standards. And then maybe our most exciting vertical that we're really working on is fan ownership and sports teams. And we're really excited to push that forward too.
Yeah, well, we're already kind of seeing some of that, in a little bit of a different direction, not a co-op, but with Karate Combat. And I know there's other sports leagues and sports teams that are looking at doing the same thing. Guys, this is really exciting stuff. We're going to be following it really closely. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
It was great talking to those guys. They're really nice guys. They're funny. They were fun to talk to, and they're obviously doing some great stuff in the space. But you mentioned drop at Davos. What did you want to say about that?
Well, I think, it was just sort of building what we said last week. We had this amazing caliber of people there. I've heard that for HBAR.io, it was particularly successful there. They met some really interesting folk out there that are interested. And I'm sure the same thing happens for the other dApps we had there. So, we had Drop there, which is facilitating micropayments. Of course, we know who've got the partnerships with Shopify and WordPress. It's another one of your use cases, your favorite, I remember saying. It's one that is in its nascency, that hasn't been adopted en masse yet, but is, again, only really enabled by the hash graph. So I think to just have them out there, they went to loads of different of the sort of panels there. I'm sure they met loads of different people. Everyone at Davos, I'm sure, would be intrigued by the word micropayments. It can facilitate so many of the companies there. So really, it was just, they put out a great tweet, a thread, showing all of the people they met, showing all the talks they were at and listening in on. And just great to see them out there, repping Hedera, repping the micropayments. And I'm hopeful that some good stuff will come from that in the future.
And one of the things that makes micropayments possible is, having a hyper efficient DLT like Hedera. And we know that University College London a few years ago came out with a study showing that Hedera was the most efficient. But it seems like they came out with another study, because I saw an infographic that shows that Hedera is even more efficient than we thought before. Did you catch that one?
Yeah, so I think there were sort of two things that were founded from that study. I think one thing is the more that the Hedera network is used, somehow the more energy efficient it comes. Now, I don't know the science behind that, but that was mentioned by Paolo of UCL. And the second thing was, I believe that the Hedera network currently uses the same amount of energy as an average US household per year. So that is just like unfathomable that it can maintain that much throughput. We saw it jump up to 8K TPS or something the other day, averaging at like 500 to 600 TPS, whatever it is at the moment. The fact that they can deliver on that scale in a decentralized fashion and still emit less energy than an average US household a year, it's just insane. I mean, it really is. Whatever Lehman did at the beginning there is some real magic. I'm sure it's only going to become more obvious over time.
Yeah, and Pablo was there at Davos as well as Drop. And Max, who we talked about last week, and he came to some really bright conclusions for Hedera's future. And I was kind of curious as to how he came to those conclusions. What were his experiences at Davos that got him to those conclusions? So I sat down with Max for a little bit to learn about his experience there. Max, you gave some great closing thoughts on your experience at Davos, which put Hedera's future in a pretty good light. But I'm curious about the experience that allowed you to come to that conclusion. Who did you speak with? What were the conversations like? What panels and demos did you watch that left you with such a good impression on Hedera's future?
So specifically to that question, it was no one big sort of eureka moment, but I think it was just 4 days of, 11 in the morning until 7 in the evening of witnessing some of the largest companies in the world witness Hedera for the first time. And it was just being a sort of fly on the wall of watching like-minded people coming together and watching the reactions of some of these, like I say, some of the largest use cases, companies, organizations in the world, over and over again over 4 days, all have the same reaction, which was, wow, have you got a place where we can talk some more? And then sort of, going into the back and then coming out with massive smiles on their face and hitting the street, sort of, almost coming out and high-fiving each other like they'd smashed out of the park. So, and that's not Hedera, that's the the companies and the use cases. So I think it was just sort of, it planted a seed in my mind, and I was just considering where we currently are in terms of where Hedera currently sits, both in terms of HBAR's price and use case and that sort of thing. Having witnessed what's going on firsthand in terms of potential use cases coming on board in the future, I think the conclusion of that was the talk, that sort of short video that I created in the car. That was just, it just came out of me. It was just one take, me talking out loud of how I think and what I think happens next.
Yeah, no, makes perfect sense. But it's interesting. So it wasn't so much the enterprises that are already building or the governing council members. It was the other enterprises that were there in Davos that were talking to those companies that are already building on Hedera.
I think it was a mixture of both. I think that some of the frustration is that so there's two parts to the frustration that I see in the cryptographic industry, which is that a lot of companies are willing to, some platforms, they go and buy a coffee at Starbucks, and then all of a sudden Starbucks' logo is on their website and they're a partner because they had a coffee there. And so there's a lot of if they have one meeting and, it may have gone really well, then they're a partner and it's done. So that's the first thing. So you see these platforms, and some of them, might be true sort of potential use cases, but they certainly sort of estimate the involvement of those businesses, both the platforms and the people, the sort of fans of that platform. And then the second part to that is because Hedera does things differently, they don't announce a name until there's an actual use case. They don't announce a governing council member until the ink is dry on the contract. And so that can be quite frustrating because the stuff that comes forward is fantastic, but it's very slow moving. And some of these large organizations move at a glacial pace. And so I too am human, and I get frustrated that, if the technology is so great and you're a governing council member and have been for several years, where's the use case? But now I've spoken to some of the governing council members' representatives, person to person, face to face, the expectation is warranted, because they are doing it. And a great example of that is Atoma.io. That use case that I sort of showcased at Davos. Wow. It's just seamless, fast. It's going to be massive. They've got a huge client coming on very, very shortly, which is going to be fantastic. I think they touched on that in an interview, but it's not for me to say who that is. But so it's that, but it's also seeing some of the largest retailers in the world come in and just see their faces as the penny drops. Wow, this is the real deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to a term that I coined when talking about Hedera years ago, all substance, no hype. And that's definitely what we get. But eventually it's going to be hyped on its own. So, Max, like so many others in the Hedera space, you've decided to build on the network as well. Can you give us an update on your project?
Yeah, I can. Thanks for asking. So very shortly, we are going to be sending a link out to the owners of the Walker & Williams NFT partnership program, and also some trusted friends in the community. I hope you'll be included in that. Just a stress test and try and break the website. That is going to be a new version of my website, the Walker & Williams NFT partnership, but it's also the basis of something very exciting that we will be announcing very, very soon.
All right, great. I'll definitely be part of it. I really appreciate everything you do in this space. Thank you, and good luck with your project.
Thanks so much. Good to speak to you. Take care.
Zeb, we also got some news coming out of another app we covered a few weeks ago, and that's Kabila app. Do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, so the team at Kabila are great. I've spoken to Manu a lot, who's sort of the point of contact for me there. And they're building these NFT tools for the Hedera ecosystem, which really, really integrate all of the beauty of the Hedera token service, all of the different things that make it so powerful, that make it compliant, that make it regulated compliant, that make just building an NFT on Hedera that much more efficient. They're really going for the full stack of token service tooling. And so I think a few weeks ago or a couple of weeks ago, they did their first kind of live stress test for token holders of their Kabila NFT, and it went down very well. Whereas this week they did it open to the public completely, so that anyone, it wasn't token gated, And I think they sold out their NFTs that they were launch padding in I think it was like just under like 2 seconds or something. You know, a crazy amount of traction. I think probably one of the quickest sales so far. But not only that, you know, the full suite of tools are being used by different people. There were no issues whatsoever. It came out the other side swimming. So yeah, just really excited to see what they continue to develop. You know, they're serious builders in our ecosystem. And also they're representing the Spanish side, the Spanish community, along with Ed Marquez from Hedera. So yeah, those two there are doing some cool cross-chain spaces, some cross-language spaces. So yeah, exciting to see them build out that Spaniard community and sort of Latin American community with us.
Yeah, and speaking of Ed, you know, we'll get into the darker underbelly of the crypto space, and that's fun. We knew that this was probably going to come after, you know, we had our step function use case go live. We knew there was going to be pushback against that, and that's exactly what we've seen. And Ed did a great tweet thread, and we'll get into that in a second. But we knew this was going to happen. We had this huge use case go live that's putting tremendous throughput through the network, and we knew people were going to give some pushback. And you know, I want to give some examples of what we saw. So there was a tweet put out by a gentleman named Peter Oravec, and he said, your stats are misleading. 99.6% of HBAR transactions are just consensus messages. And of course, people are going to put out these kind of tweets, but what was a little frustrating is other outlets then picked it up. The crypto outlet You Today picked this up and ran with it, pretty much made an entire story around it. And then we saw crypto influencers jumping on it as well. And of course, it completely misunderstands the point. But I understand some of the confusion, right? Because they see Hedera consensus service or they see consensus messages and they think we're doing it just to reach consensus. But that's not the case, right? It would be better to frame the Hedera consensus service as the notary service or the Hedera data logging service. But of course, people got frustrated with this, including Christian Hasker. He put out something that was a little bit salty, but they also have to understand that this huge use case we just came out with is a huge accomplishment, and not just for Hedera, but the DLT space in general. And we've been waiting for it for a long time. So if people come out and especially put out misinformation about it, it's really frustrating for our community. But also from our community's perspective, we have to think about what our goals are. And our goal should be to bring these people into the fold, to make sure that they understand, they take those misunderstandings and shift it into a deep understanding of what Hedera is and what we are doing.
On, you know, how we approach these people, I think it's so important that we approach them with respect and sort of compassion. And I think, you know, one of the most obvious things to me within the realm of communication on Twitter and communities, and if we're trying to continue to build our community, I think a topic that people really need to understand is this sort of notion of pride. You know, pride is at the most fundamental level to us all, you know, whether or not we want to admit it, sort of deep down, consciously or consciously, there is a very obvious sense of pride. You know, it's wrapped up with the very human constitution. You know, it's the 2 and 2 that almost makes us whole. And there is a huge amount of pride in this space, you know, whether that's emotional, physical, intellectual, it exists, but most so is this intellectual side. And, you know, people spend a huge amount of time and money on the coattails of that, but especially time sort of researching these projects, you know, doing their due diligence and, you know, coming to sort of very real, very thought out conclusions. And so much so that they're willing to spend every day arguing the case to create these social communities and form friendships with like-minded people that they've never met, and allow that ledger, this Web3 world, to become a part of their, you know, their real physical identity. And I think that is the most important thing to understand when engaging people, is that, you know, you have to have this civil discourse. Because if you tell them that they're being stupid or they don't understand or they're wrong or their ledger's crap, whatever it is, all you're doing is insulting their pride, you're insulting their intelligence. And so that rather than listening to anything you have to say, they sort of, you know, retreat into this sort of cocoon of contempt or whatever it is, where they won't listen to you. They'll never look at your ledger again. They'll every time a bit of FUD comes up, they'll be the first one there telling everyone that it's true. And because of that, you just lose so many potential community members. And one thing that has always filtered down from the top for us is the philosophy of Lehman and Mance. This philosophy of compassion, of well thought out argumentation, of kindness and respect and professionalism. And that, I think, is one of the biggest reasons why our community is so good at educating and talking. And it really is up to us to continue that, to pass on that baton to every single person that, comes out with FUD or whatever it is. Rather than being insulted of our own pride or of our own intellect, we have to understand that what they're saying just comes from a misinformed place and educate them rather than insult them. And I think the more we educate, like we already do, but the more we educate, the more people are going to come on board. And, there's a fantastic example of that. There's Adam Bergman, who is an Algorand influencer, and he put out this Algorand versus HBAR comparison. And it was, some of it was a bit misinformed. And I put out this tweet to him and said, this is what's wrong, this is what's right. We had this formal discussion, and now he's part of the HBARbarians. He puts out weekly content on Hedera. And because of that, we get an extra, 3,000 views a week, 4,000 views a week.
Sure.
And, that's how it should work. And because of that, I've now got a friend in Adam, and we've got a friend in the community, and someone who really supports us. And I think just the more we understand that and the more we do that, the better off we're going to be, 100%.
I will also say that I've put out some salty responses to those things, and I understand the frustration. And if a few of those slip out there, it is okay. But we do want to understand what our goals are, and that is bringing more people into the fold. And a great example of that is Ed from Swirls Labs. He said Hedera does not count gossip events as TPS. Only user-submitted and user-paid transactions are reported in TPS. God knows what the number would be if gossip events were included in Hedera's TPS. It would probably be in the millions. And then he goes on with a fantastic thread. And this is the kind of FUD busting we want to see. Ed is a great representative for the space. But again, I understand the salty stuff as well, because some of the stuff that was put out was really bad and put out by professional news outlets, or what is supposed to be professional news outlets. But of course, the old saying that is often attributed to Gandhi, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Now, we've gone through these phases, kind of up and down through them. When you're getting to the fight phase is when you're getting closer to winning. And it was funny because Red Hat had something going on with IBM, and they had this saying up on their wall, and they changed the end of it. And I think it's something important to think about. Their edited version said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then they buy you. So I think that's something else to consider. But throughout all this, the Hedera community has been very strong, and we actually had a tweet put out by Altcoin Daily saying, who likes Hedera? Does HBAR have fans? And the Hederians came out in force with right now about 2,400 likes and hundreds of replies. Any thoughts on that one, Zep?
Yeah, honestly, like seeing obviously being engagement farmed isn't the nicest thing in the world, but there is this sort of correlation between being engagement farmed, an influencer seeing the size of and power of a community, and then creating actual content about it. Because all influencers are trying to do is get the maximum views. And so when an influencer comes out, I've seen 3 in the last few days. Altcoin Daily sort of hit that first domino, where we've seen three or so tweets get over 1,000 likes and hundreds of comments from HBARbarians. And that is a positive indicator, for us in terms of looking at our community strength, seeing how much we're growing. But it's a good sign that influencers are paying attention. And of course, influencers hold a lot of power in this space in terms of informing the masses. So I will continue to retweet those things, even if I know I'm being farmed. It's a weird positive farm. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it was all positive, and we got all kinds of great comments. And because they have another community that's looking at their tweets, it gives us an opportunity to highlight some of the good things about Hedera. There was another thing that you wanted to mention, and that had to do with the blockchain journal getting highlighted by ZDNet. Any information on that?
Oh, yeah. So Blockchain Journal, who were at the Hedera house in Davos, and also just around Davos in general, doing a lot of different interviews, both on Hedera and cross-chain. Their interview with Atmer.io and Avery Dennison, ended up in this big news publication. So that was just great to see that a non-Web3 media was picking up a new Web3 media publication discussing a Hedera use case on scale, i.e. Atmer.io. So yeah, it's just really positive to see a Web2 media publication of a pretty high site, big caliber, covering real world utility in blockchain, and of course that being tied to Hedera.
And Zeb, we saw something similar come out of another publication, Benzinga, about the Hedera chief of staff. Any insight on that?
Yeah, so Nilmini Rubin, who's the new chief of staff and policy at Hedera, she got a lot of airtime at Davos. And I'm sure this comes from a lot of the contacts she already had. She worked at the Fed before in the Treasury with a focus on international banking and securities. So I'm sure she's very well connected. But so either from that or from by virtue of being at Davos, she's had a lot of coverage on CoinDesk, Cointelegraph, on the Washington Post, now on Benzinga. And she just went into, what Hedera is doing, how it's creating sort of this institutional adoption, what she thinks of the market, so on and so forth. But again, Hedera is in these Web2 medias, which is great to see. And hopefully only more of that going forward with her at the reins.
Yeah, she has an impressive resume, and I'm sure we're going to get some great stuff out of her in the future. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit and get into some network analysis by taking a look at Metrica. All right, so every time Hedera breaks a new daily transaction record, we're setting a new world record for a real-world use case built on a DLT. And yesterday we broke that record. I think the highest I saw was about 50.77 million transactions in that 24-hour period. And today, at the time of recording, we're sitting at 50.07 million. The transactions have leveled off a bit, but that also has to do with the scale a little bit. We're seeing down as low as about 500 transactions per second and as high as about 620 transactions per second. Smart contracts are sitting about the same at a little under 20,000 transactions in a 24-hour period. The time to consensus has leveled off at about 4.7 seconds, which is higher than last week. So I do want to explain that a little bit. Last week when we were looking at transactions and time to consensus, it was really volatile, and that had to do with the new gossip protocol that we talked about last week. So they took that gossip protocol back out and put the old one in, and we saw transaction volume drop down, and then they methodically brought it back up. From my understanding, they are going to address the volatility issues with that new super fast gossip protocol, and they're going to bring it back at a later time. And of course, that dropped our time to consensus by about 2 seconds. So really impressive, and hopefully we'll get that back sooner than later. But still, considering we're doing about 550 transactions per second on a consistent basis, 4.7 seconds to finality isn't that bad. And looking at account creation over the past week, it has jumped up even more. So last week we were talking about the fact that we were getting an average between 3,000 and 4,000 accounts created per day, and that's jumped up to closer to 5,000 accounts created each day. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we saw that massive spike with Lethos, and so anything's going to look dwarfed in comparison to that. But of course, we are averaging a lot higher than we were before. So that's just a very positive growth indicator. We know we've got Pangolin, which has been delayed, unfortunately, but I'm sure there'll be a lot of new accounts coming through there. We've got Lethos launching its first campaign very shortly. So it's going to be interesting to see where the accounts are, I think, in the next few weeks. Already a positive trend.
Yep. And looking at our fungible token summary, most of them are the same, what we've seen recently, but I did notice that HBAR Suite is breaking into the top 10, so that was good to see.
They actually sold out. They sold out their ICO, yeah. So congratulations to H Suite. I believe they've now sold out.
And moving over to our NFT summary, Hashgraph Name Service is still in that top 10. I see Wizards. I see Elf-U, the cosmetics company. We talked about those last week. Of course, Earthlings is in the top 10. We see Web2.3. And a few that I don't recognize. Do you know what RC Access is?
I know there's Personal Access, which is created by Dylan Faircloth and his wife, Sarah. I don't know if it's connected to that. Maybe. I'm not sure. But I'm not 100% sure on that one.
Zeb, do you have anything else on NFTs?
Yeah, so looking at the recently minted NFTs on Dragonglass, I can see these sort of avatar figures, which look very much in the likeness of the teasers that we've seen from This Is Zoop. And Zoop, as we know, is I think the $15 million dollar raise they had. They're the team that created OnlyFans, the two people that founded it. And they're creating this kind of metaversial avatar Web3 product for sort of these social integrations, but also with was it Metaverse Me, I believe, they had a huge partnership there whereby these avatars would be used in this ecosystem of mobile games. So seeing that those mints are now happening on mainnet, hopefully that means we're going to see a bit more from them coming soon. It looks like they're sort of gearing up for something. But alongside this is Zoop. I saw this week that Dead Pixels and Hangry Barboons, so Will from Dead Pixels and Hangry, they're setting up a new sort of cross NFT project spaces between the two of them. So two of our leading projects, of course, NFT projects, they're going to be doing a weekly spaces. So check that out. Dead Pixels have also collaborated with Bullyverse. They're one of the big Polygon NFT projects. They're a sort of metaverse game as well as NFT project. Credible Crypto, who's one of our big influencers, he's a very big fan of them. So he's been sharing it, obviously getting us more traction there for the Dead Pixels. Earthlings did very well this week. They sold out their postcard mint.
Mm-hmm.
So they sold that out even before it got to my round. I think I was there with the Head Starter Access Pass. Mm-hmm. So I didn't even get that, unfortunately. But yeah, they did very well there, sold out very quickly. So it's been a strong week all around. I believe actually, so on StockTwits, they put out their sort of weekly data, daily data on the NFT markets, and we're above Avalanche, we're above Algorand, we're above Near, we're above loads of the big projects as of yesterday for that daily volume. So yeah, positive growth there for sure.
Yeah, without a doubt. Certainly good to see. And with that, Zeb, we'll go ahead and get into DeFi. Starting with Saucer Swap, we are over $30 million total value locked. And looking at the farming rewards for some of their popular trading pairs, HBAR USDC is at 59%, HBAR Sauce is at 39%, and HBARx is at 16%. Looking at the LP rewards on Saucer Swap, HBARx is at 0.4%, Sauce HBAR is at just over 1%, and USDC HBAR is still the place to be at almost 9%. And HeliSwap's total value locked has also gone up to over $7 million. And looking at their farming rewards, USDC Ohm is at 68%, HBAR Ohm is at 58%, HBAR USDC is at 56%, and HBARx is at 13%. Not much to pass on with Stater. We still have a total value locked of 1.3 billion HBAR, which is just over $91 million, and we still have an APY at about 8.5%. And moving on to the crypto market, it almost seems tame compared to some of the tech stocks out there. But Bitcoin has still had a good week, being up 11% on the week and a little over 1% on the day. HBAR is up about 3% on the week and about the same over the past 24 hours. Crypto has held up well this week, certainly helped out by the stock market. The amazing gains that HBAR enjoyed the week before, for the most part, have held. At the time of recording, we're sitting at exactly 7 cents. I mentioned last week we might see some support around 6.3 cents, and that's exactly what we bounced off of a few days ago. And we did see a wick go up to just about 8 cents. And that's offered resistance going all the way back to the Google high almost 3 years ago. So if we go on a run, that's where I would expect to see some resistance. Overall, I'm really happy with the way the HBAR market looks. All right, Zep, is there anything else you'd like to pass on before we let you go?
I just think, there's a lot of exciting avenues of utility starting to see real growth on Hedera. Obviously, our big TPS hitter with Avery Dennison, supply chain, carbon emissions tracking, mixing sustainability and supply chain, huge. Everybody needs that. Alongside that, however, we've seen our fintech ecosystem really putting in groundwork. We've seen YPay come out in that spaces that you hosted. We saw Carmelle come out and talk about the IS 20022 compliancy. And just from that space, we saw how many big hitters we have across our ecosystem, across different verticals. We're seeing This Is Zoop minting today, like we just mentioned, in the metaverse side of things. We've got Pangolin, who hopefully will be next week. I'm not too sure. On the DeFi side of things, we've got Dead Pixels with their new drop on the NFT side of things, which I'm sure is going to be a sellout very, very quick. Excited for that. But just across the board, we're seeing different verticals all accelerating, all excelling. And I think, that's going to be a common theme as we move forwards. And of course, Lethos, that's going to be, I think, a very big thing that we will be talking about next week, I hope. So gaming, there we go. What more could we want?
Yeah, right. And that's the thing. It feels like we can move forward now with a lot more confidence since we have that number one spot when it comes to throughput, and we get to have those conversations. But next week, we're going to be having at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, we're going to have a Twitter space on refi. That was your suggestion, and we've got a really great panel coming for that. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.